Hospitals have a sound that doesn't belong anywhere else. Soft shoes on polished floors, muffled announcements, the distant beep that keeps time for people you've never met. I'd been here times that the routine had started to feel almost safe. Sign in, sanitizer, smile, as if nothing here breaks. I was only supposed to drop off a bag of toiletries for my aunt. I remember thinking about normal things, traffic, a text I still hadn't answered, whether I'd left the stove on. My mind was on autopilot, and my heart was calm in the way it gets calm right before it learns it was wrong. On the way to the nurse's station, a clipboard sat half-hanging from a metal rack, the top page angled outward like it wanted to be noticed. Just paper and ink. I shouldn't have looked, but when your eyes land somewhere, they don't ask permission first. They just land. Room number, age, admission time, diagnosis reduced to abbreviations. My gaze skimmed the lines, half bored, half aware I was crossing a line. Then my attention snagged on a bolded box near the bottom. Next of kin. The patient's name was unfamiliar. A stranger. Under relationship, someone had written family friend, which already felt odd, like a story that couldn't decide what it was. And then the contact name. My father's name. Not a nickname, not a similar surname. His full legal name, spelled exactly the way it appears on paperwork and the few formal letters he ever bothered to send. Even the middle initial was there, cold and correct. For a second, my brain refused to translate what my eyes were reporting. It felt like seeing the right word in the wrong place, recognizable, impossible. My mouth went dry. My father has always been a defined thing in my life, a man who stays at a safe distance. He answers calls when it suits him, shows up when it's convenient, loves in careful portions like affection is something you might run out of. He has never been next of kin to anyone, not in the way a hospital means it. I reread the box 3 times, blinking harder each time as if my eyes might correct themselves. They didn't. The name stayed there, anchored to the page like it belonged. Explanations rushed in to rescue me. A clerical error. Another man with the same name. A coincidence so stupid it would be funny later. But my father's name isn't common. And the phone number beside it, those last 4 digits, hit me like a slap. I knew them. I'd typed them into my own phone when I was a teenager, back when I still believed numbers meant access. My fingers gripped the edge of the clipboard without me telling them to. The paper trembled, or maybe that was me. Suddenly the fluorescent lights felt harsher, the hallway too bright for secrets. Behind the counter, a nurse laughed quietly at something a colleague said. Life kept moving like nothing had changed, while my entire internal world lurched. I forced myself to look away and act normal. My aunt's bag was still in my hand, the plastic handles cutting into my skin like a reminder that I'd come here for something small. But the chart had rewritten the room. I glanced up, and for the first time since walking in, I noticed how easy it would be for a person to be slipped into the system under the wrong story. How a single line of ink could grant authority, permission, power. My father's name wasn't just on a page, it was a claim. I looked around the corridor, heart hammering so loudly I was sure someone could hear it, and the strangest certainty settled over me. No matter how quickly I walked away, I was never going to unsee what I'd just seen. I walked out of that hallway like I'd stolen something, even though all I'd taken was a line of ink and the way it rearranged my insides. The automatic door's side shut behind me, and the air outside hit my face. Warm, ordinary, almost insulting. Cars still passed. People still argued into phones. Meanwhile, my father's name sat on a hospital chart for a stranger like it had every right to be there. I tried to do the thing I'm best at, compartmentalize. Put the fear in a box, label it later, carry on. It's a skill you learn when you grow up with a parent who is technically alive, technically reachable, and still somehow missing. The world loves clean stories. Mine has always been a sentence with missing words. From the outside, my life looks steady. I work, I pay rent, I show up when I say I will. I keep my keys in the same dish by the door and I make coffee the same way every morning, like repetition can buy safety. That day, I went home and did the usual motions. Shoes off, bag down, hands washed. Because when your reality wobbles, you cling to whatever doesn't. But my mind kept returning to the same impossible label, next of kin. When I was a kid, next of kin was just movie language. Someone gets hurt, and a father is called, and the father comes running as if love is a reflex. I assumed that's what dads did. Not because mine showed me, but because every form had a box for father, like it was standard equipment. My father did come, sometimes. That was the problem. He was never absent enough to let me grieve him properly, and never present enough to let me rely on him. He hovered at the edge of my life like a figure in the background of a photo, proof he existed, and proof he wasn't the point. He was the man who picked me up late and acted like the clock was wrong. The man who promised, next weekend, so often that next weekend, became a place I stopped traveling to in my head. When other kids complained their parents were too strict, I stayed quiet. I didn't want strict. I wanted consistent. I wanted someone who didn't vanish into work, moods, or pride like those were emergencies more important than a kid waiting by a window. And yet, if you met him, you'd think I was exaggerating. My father has the kind of charm that works on strangers. He's polite in public, the sort of man who holds doors and smiles at cashiers, who can say family with a warm voice. He tells stories that make him sound generous, misunderstood, hardworking. People believe him because believing him makes their world feel orderly. A good dad exists. Therefore, he must be one. I've watched him light up at other people's milestones, handshakes, congratulations, big smiles, while my own life events got a delayed call, a proud of you, and a quick exit. Busy became his most dependable trait. Busy was the shield he raised against intimacy and the excuse he offered like a gift. If he was busy, then he wasn't choosing absence. Absence was happening to him. My mother never used the word abandonment. She didn't have to. She carried his inconsistency the way some people carry old injuries, quietly, with a limp you only notice if you're looking. She'd say, "Don't wait up," or "We'll go anyway," and that was how she taught me to survive disappointment without numbing it. The lesson stuck. I learned to plan as if I was alone even when I was. I learned to keep my hopes small enough to fit in my pocket. As I got older, I adjusted the relationship into something manageable. We became polite, seasonal, the kind of father-child connection that can pass for normal in a short conversation. We talked on holidays. We asked safe questions, work, health, weather. It felt like walking across a frozen lake and pretending you don't hear the cracking underneath. He could be kind, too, which is what made him dangerous to my heart. Every once in a while he would show up with a gift, or take me to lunch, or tell me he was proud. Those moments were bright enough to trick me into forgetting how quickly they faded. It's hard to be angry at someone who gives you just enough to keep you hungry. So I stopped expecting. I trained myself out of longing the way you train yourself out of biting your nails. When friends talked about calling their parents for advice, I smiled and changed the subject. When someone said, "You're lucky, at least you have your dad," I nodded because correcting them felt like undressing in public. That's why his name on that chart hit me the way it did. Not just because it was strange, but because it implied a version of him I'd never been allowed to have. It suggested responsibility. It suggested closeness. It suggested that somewhere, in a room down a sterile hallway, my father was the person who got called when things went wrong. For a stranger. My logic tried to stabilize itself again. Maybe it was old information, never updated. Maybe someone listed him without permission. Maybe my father did a favor for someone at the edge of his world. But every possibility came with the same sharp question. Why would he do for someone else what he never did for me? I sat at my kitchen table and stared at my phone like it was a weapon I didn't know how to hold. His contact name was still there in my favorites, untouched for months. I hadn't removed it, not because I needed it, but because some part of me still clung to the idea that one day he might become the father his title promised. I called once. It rang until it didn't. I didn't leave a message. I told myself it was fine, that he was busy, that this was nothing. Then I called again, and this time my hand shook so hard I nearly dropped the phone. The silence on the other end wasn't just silence, it was the old familiar distance, expanding between us like it always had. And somewhere behind that distance was a stranger in a hospital bed. and my father's name printed beside the words, next of kin, waiting to be tested. By the time evening settled, I knew I couldn't live with the question in my chest. If my father wouldn't answer, I would start with the one place his name had no business being, the nurse's station. I would ask carefully, then harder. Because whatever story had put him there had already pulled me in, and I was done being the kind of person who politely looks away ever again. I went back the next morning with a lie ready on my tongue and my heart already sprinting. In daylight, the hospital looked less like a maze and more like a machine, clean, efficient, and indifferent to the small personal earthquakes happening inside. I told myself I was only going to confirm a mistake. I told myself I wasn't about to crack open my family history under fluorescent lights. The lobby was busy in that quiet hospital way, people sitting too still, eyes fixed on nothing, hands wrapped around paper cups as if warmth could anchor them. I signed in, nodded at the volunteer, and walked toward the corridor where the clipboard had waited like a trap. It wasn't there. For a few seconds I felt ridiculous, like I'd invented the whole thing. Then I remembered the exact way my father's middle initial sat between his first and last name, cold, correct. My body still remembered the rush of it. I slowed near the nurse's station and pretended to read the signage while I watched staff move behind the counter. I didn't know what I was allowed to ask. I only knew what I needed, an explanation that didn't make me feel like my life had been misfiled. A nurse with tired eyes stepped out, adjusting her badge. She looked competent, brisk, the kind of person who has learned to be gentle without being slow. I chose her because she looked like she might tell the truth if the truth didn't get her in trouble. "Excuse me," I said, keeping my voice low. "I was here yesterday and I saw a chart on the rack. I think there's an error in the contact information." Her face tightened. "What sort of error?" I swallowed. "The next of kin listed, it's someone I know, and I'm pretty sure it's incorrect." She didn't answer immediately. Her gaze flicked to the computers, to the hallway, as if checking who could hear. "If you're not the patient or authorized family, I can't discuss anything in the chart." I'd expected that. The hospital had a job, and it wasn't to untangle my personal mess. Still, the words landed like a door slamming. "I understand," I said quickly. "I'm not asking about medical details. I'm asking because the person listed is my father, and I'm concerned." There, the truth, plain and inconvenient. Her expression softened a fraction, but her posture stayed firm. "I'm sorry. We can't confirm or deny personal information." "Then how does it work?" I asked. "If someone is listed as next of kin, do you call them? Do you verify it? Because if it's wrong, if it's someone who shouldn't be." She lifted a hand, a small boundary. "We ask the patient when possible, or we take the information provided at intake. If the patient can't answer, we use whatever information is available, but I can't talk about any specific case." My throat tightened. Behind her, a monitor beeped steadily, indifferent. "Okay," I said. "Hypothetically, if a person found out they were listed without consent, what should they do?" She hesitated. That hesitation was the first crack in the wall. "They should speak to patient relations," she said, "or the charge nurse. They can look into concerns about contact information." Paperwork, time, and time felt like a luxury I didn't have. "Can I at least know the patient's last name?" I asked, hatting myself as the question left my mouth. Her eyes sharpened. "No." The word was clean and final. My cheeks burned. "I'm sorry," I said. "I'm just trying to understand why my father would be on a stranger's chart. That's not like him." I didn't say the rest, not like him with me. The worst part was how clearly I could still see the details, like my memory was trying to prove I wasn't being dramatic. The patient's first name had been something soft and ordinary. The last name had a hard edge to it, unfamiliar on my tongue. Age, not elderly, not a child, old enough to make choices, young enough for those choices to be stolen. Under relationship, someone had written family friend, as if that phrase could explain anything. And the phone number beside my father's name matched the one I'd memorized in high school, the one I dialed when I was scared and still believed he might come. Seeing it, there felt like signature on a confession I hadn't opened. The nurse studied me, weighing something. "If you're worried about your father," she said carefully, "you should talk to him. If you're worried about the patient, you can share your concerns with patient relations. That's all I can advise. Talk to him, as if my father was a person you could reach with a call and not a locked room with a friendly sign." "I tried," I said. He didn't answer. Something shifted, small, almost invisible. She didn't give me information, but she gave me a look that said, "I believe you." Her gaze dropped to the folder in her hands. Then, very softly, she said, "If the information you saw was recent, it would include the intake time." My pulse jumped. "What?" She didn't repeat it. She didn't have to. The implication landed like another line of ink. "I remember it," I whispered, because I did. The chart had said admitted at 1:12 a.m., a time that didn't belong to anything good. The nurse's jaw tightened, as if she regretted even that small hint. "People come in at night," she said, neutral again. "Accidents, emergencies." My stomach rolled. A stranger, an emergency, my father's number. "And the last name," I said, thinking aloud now. "It wasn't ours, it was different." She didn't confirm. She didn't deny. She only said, "Patient relations can document your concern." "Where is it?" I asked. "Second floor," she said, "left of the elevators." I walked away with my hands clenched so tight my nails bit into my palms. I passed families clustered around vending machines, couples whispering, a man praying with his forehead against the wall. All of them had reasons to be here. None of them looked like they were carrying my specific kind of confusion. The kind that comes when you realize your father might have a whole life that intersects with yours only when it causes damage. At the elevator, I stared at my reflection in the steel doors, eyes wide, lips pressed tight, a person trying to look normal while a storm gathered inside. Patient relations would take a report. They would protect privacy. They would do everything except tell me the one thing I needed: who. By the time I reached the second floor, curiosity had turned feral. It wasn't just nosiness anymore, it was survival. If my father was listed as next of kin, someone had put him there for a reason, and I couldn't shake the thought that the reason might be dangerous. I stepped out of the elevator and pulled out my phone again. I didn't call him. I opened a blank message, stared at the empty space, and realized how strange it was that I was afraid of my own father, afraid of what he'd say, and more afraid of what he wouldn't. Then I started walking toward the office that could look into it, already knowing that the real answers were going to live somewhere else. In the silence he kept choosing, and in whatever waited behind that stranger's name. I didn't go into patient relations. I stood outside the door long enough to read the office hours twice, like the printed schedule might suddenly offer the truth in smaller font. Behind that door was policy, procedure, and the kind of careful language that keeps hospitals from getting sued. What I needed wasn't careful. What I needed was my father's voice saying, plainly, why his name belonged to a stranger at 1:12 in the morning. So I left. In the parking lot, I sat in my car with the engine off and the windows up, listening to my own breathing. The hospital rose behind me, bright, sterile, sure of itself. My phone lay on the passenger seat like a loaded thing. I'd spent years training myself not to call him unless it was necessary, because needing him was a gamble I kept losing. Now a stranger's chart had made him necessary again. I picked up the phone and stared at his contact photo, an old picture from a family gathering, his smile wide, his arm around someone else. That was his specialty, looking like a man who stayed. I hit call before I could rethink it. It rang. One ring, two, three. My stomach tightened on each one. On the fifth ring, the line clicked into voicemail. His recorded greeting was warm and casual. "Hey, it's me. Leave a message." The sound of his voice made something sharp rise in my chest. I didn't leave a message. Messages made things negotiable. I wanted an answer. I ended the call and tried again. This time, it went to voicemail faster, like the network itself had learned my odds. My hands shook, not from fear of him exactly, but from the old humiliation of wanting something from someone who had trained me to expect disappointment. I typed a text, erased it, typed again, and finally sent. I saw your name listed as next of kin for a patient. Call me. It's urgent. 2 gray checks. No typing bubble. No response. I stared at those gray checks like they were a verdict. Delivery didn't mean he'd opened it. It only meant the message had reached the edge of his life and been left there. I pictured his phone lighting up on a desk, my name bright for a moment, his hand hovering, then turning the screen face down. The image was cruel, but it fit the pattern. He'd always practiced a gentle kind of neglect, never loud enough to be undeniable, never warm enough to be real. I told myself I was being dramatic, yet my pulse refused to slow. Still, the hospital chart had rewritten our rules. If he could ignore me while a stranger depended on him, then his silence wasn't personal, it was a warning to me. I watched people come and go through the sliding doors. A couple argued in whispers. A nurse hurried past with a clipboard pressed to her chest. Somewhere inside, the stranger in that room still had my father's name as their lifeline. 5 minutes passed. 10. My brain began building excuses for him the way it always had. Maybe he was driving. Maybe he was in a meeting. Maybe his phone was dead. Excuses were easier than the simplest answer. He had seen me and chosen silence. I called again. This time he answered on the 3rd ring, so suddenly I almost dropped the phone. Hello. His voice was steady, not surprised, not worried. Just normal, like I'd called to ask about the weather. Dad, I said, I need to ask you something. A pause, not confusion, calculation. I was at the hospital, I continued. I saw a chart. Your name is listed as next of kin for a patient. A stranger. Why? He didn't say what. He didn't ask which hospital. He exhaled slow. Where did you see that? In the hallway. Your full name, your number. You shouldn't be looking at charts, he said, and there it was, his first move. Not denial, deflection. Don't do that, I snapped. This isn't about me. Why are you on their file? It's nothing, he said. Nothing, I repeated. Then it should be easy to explain. It's a mistake, he replied smoothly. Hospitals mess things up. If it's a mistake, fix it, I said. Call them and... Listen, he interrupted, voice lowering. I'm handling it. Handling what? The words hit me like a familiar shove back into childhood. Who is this person? I asked. Silence, thick and deliberate. Are they okay? I pressed. Because if you're next of kin, you could make decisions. You're overthinking, he said. It's not your business. Not your business. The phrase snapped my patience. It became my business when your name, my father's name, showed up next to a stranger and no one will tell me why. He sighed as if I was the exhausting one. I have work. Answer one question, I said. Do I know them? No, he said immediately. The speed of the answer made my skin prickle. Are they family? No. A friend. Something like that. What does that mean? I demanded. Why would you be next of kin for something like that? His voice hardened. Drop it. The air in my car felt suddenly thin. You're not denying it, I said slowly. You're not explaining it, you're just ordering me away. I'm trying to protect you, he said. Protection, spoken by the man who had never been consistent enough to protect anything except his own comfort. Protect me from what? I asked. He didn't answer. On the other end, I heard movement, like keys or a door. He was already leaving the conversation. I'll call you later, he said. No, I said, no more later. His tone turned flat. I'm handling it, stop digging around. Digging around, as if the truth was dirt. The call ended. Not a goodbye, not a promise, just dead silence where his voice had been. I sat there with the phone still at my ear, listening to nothing, feeling the old ache of being shut out. The difference this time was that the silence wasn't only about me. It was about a real person in a real bed, and my father positioned like a gatekeeper. A minute later, my phone buzzed. Don't go back there, please. Please, the politeness wasn't kindness. It was control dressed in manners. And for the first time, I understood his indifference wasn't careless, it was strategic. He wasn't ignoring me because he didn't care. He was ignoring me because he cared about something else. I looked at the hospital building, its windows reflecting a bright, innocent sky, and a decision settled in me so clean it felt like relief. I was done asking my father for permission to know the truth. If he wouldn't tell me who that patient was, I would figure it out the only way I could. I would follow the evidence. I would follow the names. I would follow the trail he thought he'd buried. And whatever I found, I would not look away. The first thing I did was something I'd always sworn I wouldn't. I turned my father into a problem to solve. Not a person, not a relationship, not an ache, an equation. If he wouldn't give me the answer, I would build it from pieces, one small fact at a time, until it couldn't hide behind his calm voice anymore. I started with what I had. A name, a phone number, an intake time, and a last name that felt like grit between my teeth. I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open and my coffee going cold, and I typed the stranger's surname into every search box I could find, adding the city, adding the hospital. Results bloomed. Obituaries, registries, old sports rosters. Nothing that explained a chart at 1:12 a.m. Then I searched my father. He kept a small footprint, the way people do when they like to move without leaving prints. A dated business profile. A photo from a community fundraiser where he stood smiling near the edge of the frame. In public, he was always adjacent to goodness, like virtue was a coat you could wear without letting it touch your skin. I leaned back and tried to breathe, digging through pixels because my father told me not to felt childish and necessary at the same time. Curiosity and fear kept swapping places in my chest. Curiosity whispered, find the pattern. Fear whispered, what if you do? I went back to the only detail that felt concrete, the number on the chart. My father's. I couldn't use it, but I could use what surrounded it. People who list next of kin often share something more practical than love. An address, a network, a trail of paperwork. I opened an old folder on my computer labeled taxes, and inside it, a PDF from years ago that I'd kept for no good reason. My father's mailing address was still printed at the top. I hadn't looked at that address in a long time. I'd assumed it hadn't changed because he'd never said it had. The street name was familiar, but now I saw the number like it was new. I copied it, pasted it into a map, and stared at the pin. The neighborhood was not where I thought he lived. It was 10 minutes from the hospital. That shouldn't have mattered, but it did. 10 minutes is close enough to respond in the middle of the night, close enough to be on a list for emergencies, close enough to be involved. I zoomed in, expecting his tidy driveway. Instead, street view showed an aging duplex with a sagging porch and a mailbox that leaned like it was tired of holding secrets. The place didn't look like my father's life. It looked like a life he didn't want seen. I checked the date on the PDF. It was old. That could be meaningless. Or it could be the kind of old that turns into a clue when you finally stop believing what you've been told. I made a list on paper the way my brain likes to pretend it's in control. Hospital. 1:12 a.m. stranger's surname. My father's phone. Address 10 minutes away. Underneath, one question, why would he be next of kin? By noon, the list had grown, not with answers, but with tiny threads. A business license lookup showed my father's company registered under a slightly different address than the one he'd given me. A public directory search linked his number to a second name I didn't recognize. A woman, older, with a first name that tugged at the edge of memory like a song I couldn't place. I said the name out loud. My tongue recognized it before my mind did. A memory surfaced, sudden and sharp. Me at 12 in the backseat while my father drove through rain, wipers squeaking, radio low. He'd been tense, jaw tight, and when his phone rang, he didn't answer until the third buzz. Not now, he'd snapped, and then softer, I can't. I'd asked who it was, and he'd said, just someone who doesn't know how to take no for an answer. The name I'd found belonged to someone who sounded like that, someone who kept calling. I hated how quickly my mind began rewriting old moments into evidence. A missed birthday wasn't just a missed birthday, it was an alibi. A sudden trip wasn't just work, it was a disappearance. What I was told had always been simple, busy, tired, complicated. What I now noticed was that simple stories require cooperation, and my father had always been too practiced at withholding details. That afternoon, I went to the small convenience store near the house where I grew up, the one place where information moved faster than the news. The owner, Mr. Ton, had known everyone for decades. If anyone had seen my father's life from the side, it was him. The bell chimed as I walked in. Mr. Ton looked up, then smiled. "Ah, you, long time." We did the polite dance, "How are you?" work, until my throat tightened around the word family. I kept my voice casual. "Do you still see my dad around?" His smile flickered. Just a flicker, but I caught it. "Your father," he repeated, as if confirming he'd heard correctly. "Yeah," I said, forcing a laugh. "I tried calling, he's hard to reach." Mr. Ton's eyes slid away, to the shelves, anywhere but my face. "He is busy, man." The same word again. Busy, like an inherited script. "Does he still live around here?" I asked. Mr. Ton shifted his weight. "Why you ask?" Suspicion, protective and instant, like the community had practiced guarding him. Community loyalty can look like kindness until you're on the outside of it. Then it looks like a wall. "I saw something," I admitted. "Something that doesn't make sense." Mr. Ton's mouth tightened. "Sometimes better not to make sense." My skin prickled. "What does that mean?" He leaned closer, voice dropping. "You are grown now, you have your own life. Some things leave it." The words were gentle, but they carried the weight of a warning. My stomach sank, because warnings don't come with nothing behind them. "Is he in trouble?" I asked. "Did he hurt someone?" Mr. Ton straightened fast. No, I don't say that. I don't know, I just people talk. Better you not be inside." People talk. The phrase hit harder than any accusation. It meant there was a story. It meant there were versions of my father that existed in other people's mouths, while I'd been handed the sanitized edition. I left with a bag I didn't need and a cold tremor in my hands. Outside, the sun was bright, the street loud with ordinary life, but inside me the pace had changed. This wasn't a single mistake on a chart. This was a network of silences, and my father was at the center of it. That night I opened my old email account and searched my father's name. Buried between spam and school notifications was a thread from a decade ago. A message from my mother, forwarded without comment. Subject line, "Please respond." Inside was a scanned letter from a legal clinic. It mentioned guardianship and consent and the same name I'd found in the directory. My hands went numb. Guardianship wasn't a casual word, it was paperwork, authority, control. Before I could respond, the line went dead. I sat there, phone pressed to my ear, and the contrast that had been hovering finally snapped into focus. This wasn't just my father's private life versus my curiosity. This was truth versus a system that preferred quiet. And now someone real, was scared enough to tell me to stop. I saved the number anyway, then wrote the stranger's last name in my notes, circling it until the paper tore. Tomorrow, I promised myself, I'd learn who was in that bed, which meant I was finally close enough to something they didn't want found. The next morning, I woke up with that number still burning in my palm like it had branded me. I didn't remember falling asleep, only the last moment I'd stared at the words guardianship and consent on a decade-old letter and felt my childhood rearrange itself in silence. When you grow up learning to accept half-truths, you don't realize they're half until someone hands you the missing piece. I made coffee I didn't drink. I paced my apartment as if steps could turn anxiety into strategy. By 9, my nerves had settled into a hard, steady determination. I wasn't going to call my father again. He'd already shown me how he handled questions. He smothered them with calm, then called it protection. So I called the unknown number. It rang twice. A woman answered, voice rough with exhaustion. "Hello." For a split second, my courage stuttered. I hadn't planned what to say to a stranger who might be holding the same secret from a different angle. "Hi," I said gently. "I'm sorry to bother you. My name is—" I gave my first name only. I think we might be connected by something happening at the hospital." Silence, then very carefully. "Which hospital?" The question told me everything. She knew. She was listening for danger. I named it. Her breath caught, small and involuntary. "Who are you?" she asked again, sharper this time. "Why are you calling me?" "I'm not with the hospital," I said quickly. I'm not law enforcement. I'm someone who saw a chart, and I saw my father's name listed as next of kin." The line went so quiet I thought she'd hung up. Then she spoke, low and furious, like she'd been holding this in for years. "Of course it was," she said. My heart lurched. "You know him." A humorless laugh. "Know him," she repeated, like the word tasted bitter. "Yes, I know him." I leaned against the counter, knees suddenly weak. "Can you tell me who the patient is?" I asked. "I'm not asking for medical details. I need to understand why he's listed and if someone is in danger." Another pause. I could hear something in the background, an old fan, distant voices, life continuing while this conversation narrowed the world. "What's your father's name?" she asked. I said it. She exhaled through her nose, a sound that wasn't relief. It was confirmation. "Okay," she murmured, as if to herself. "Okay, so you're really his kid." The way she said kid made my skin prickle, like I was still small, like she'd known about me before I'd known about her. "My name is Daw Mya," she said finally. "And I'm going to tell you something, but you have to promise me you won't repeat my name to him." "I won't," I said. The words came out fast, too eager. "You don't know what he's like," she continued. "I do," I wanted to say, but I didn't. Not in the way her voice implied. I knew absence. I knew disappointment. I didn't know the other version of him yet. Daw Mya drew in a slow breath. "The patient," she said, "is a young woman. She goes by Thazin." A young woman. My mind flashed to the chart's age range. Not a child. Not elderly. Young enough that vulnerability could be mistaken for consent by people who wanted it to be. "Thazin is not your father's friend," Daw Mya said, and each word sharpened. She is someone he took in, a long time ago, when she had nowhere, when she was still soft enough to believe adults meant safety." My throat closed. "Took in how?" I managed. "She came from a village outside the city," Daw Mya said. "No parents, or the parents were alive but gone. What does it matter? She had no protection that people respected. Your father offered work, a room, help with paperwork, a hand that looked like kindness." I felt myself leaning forward, as if closeness could control the story. And then, Daw Mya said, voice breaking for the first time, "he made her dependent." The word landed heavy, undeniable. Dependent. On him, on his house, on his name, on forms she didn't understand. The kind of dependence that looks like support from far away and like a cage from inside. "He told her who to talk to, where to go," Daw Mya continued. "He handled her documents. He said she was like family." People love that phrase. It makes them stop asking questions. My stomach rolled. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you called," she said, like it was obvious. "Because I'm tired. Because I heard your voice and I thought maybe his own child will see what others refuse to." Others refuse to. The phrase dragged my mind back to Mr. H-Ton's warning. Better you not be inside. People talk, don't dig. "What happened to her?" I asked. "Why is she in the hospital?" Daw Mya hesitated. I heard her swallow. "They say she collapsed," she said. "She was found outside near the bus stop early morning. Someone called an ambulance. She had no phone, no wallet, nothing, like she'd been stripped down to a body and left." My fingers curled into my palm, a life reduced to an incident report. "And he's listed as next of kin," I whispered. "Yes," Daw Mya said, "because he arranged it that way. He always has. He likes to be the one they call. It gives him power. It gives him the right to speak for her." I could barely breathe. The contrast that had been nagging at me all week now flared bright. My father, who couldn't return my calls, had made himself the emergency contact for a young woman with no one else. Not out of love, out of control. "But why?" I said, and hated the crack in my voice. "Why her? Why would he do that?" Daw Mya's voice softened, almost pitying. Because she's easy to hide, she said. Because people don't look too closely when the story is I'm helping. Because he can be the hero and the jailer at the same time. Hero and jailer. The words lodged in my chest like hooks. I stared out my kitchen window at the street below. A mother held a child's hand while crossing. A delivery man laughed into a headset. Ordinary life, built on the assumption that adults who claim responsibility are safe. My father had always worn responsibility like a costume. Now I was hearing that he'd used it as a weapon. Is she exploited? I asked, careful and sick with dread. Maya's silence answered first. Then she said, I don't know everything. I don't want to know. But I've seen her flinch when he walks into a room. I've seen her apologize for breathing. I've seen him speak for her like she's not there. I felt anger rise, hot and clean. It was different from the anger I'd carried about my own childhood. That anger had been private, manageable, something you could swallow. This was bigger. This was moral. This was the kind of anger that demands action. Have you told anyone? I asked. Who? Mya snapped, and her exhaustion sharpened into bitterness. People like him are careful. They're polite. They donate. They smile. They make sure their hands look clean. And people like her. She paused, voice lowering. People like her are disposable. Disposable. The word made me see the hospital chart differently. Next of kin wasn't just a contact. It was a gate. It was permission. If my father got that call, he could control what happened next, where she went, who spoke for her, what story got written into her record. My phone felt suddenly too small for the weight of this. Why did you warn me to leave it alone? I asked, remembering the anonymous call from the night before. I didn't call you, Mya said, quick. I don't know that number. My blood chilled. If it wasn't her, then someone else had noticed I was looking. Someone else had decided to intervene. Listen, Mya continued, urgency creeping in. If your father realizes you're involved, he will move fast. He will change the story. He will say you're confused, emotional, disrespectful. He will turn people against you without raising his voice. I closed my eyes. I could hear him doing it, smooth and reasonable. She's overreacting. She misunderstood. She's stressed. He'd been practicing that tone my whole life. What do you want me to do? I asked. Mya hesitated. And in that hesitation, I heard a woman deciding whether to trust me with something that could blow back on her. Thazin has no one, she said finally. Not the kind of someone who can fight paperwork and polite lies. If you can't help her, then at least don't let him take her home. Take her home. The phrase made my stomach twist. It sounded like rescue. It could be a return to the cage. I won't, I said, and the promise came out before I'd fully planned how to keep it. I won't let him. When the call ended, my kitchen felt too quiet. The air itself seemed heavier, like it had absorbed every word. I stared at my list on the table, names, times, addresses, and realized it wasn't a puzzle anymore. It was a person. A young woman named Thazin collapsed at a bus stop at 1:12 in the morning, with my father's name waiting to claim her. The mystery had shifted, and so had I. I was no longer hunting answers to soothe my own confusion. I was hunting answers because someone's safety might depend on what I did next. I grabbed my keys and my jacket. My hands were steady now, not because I wasn't afraid, but because fear had finally found its purpose. I was going back to that hospital, not as a curious daughter, not as a child begging her father to explain himself, but as someone who had seen enough to know silence was part of the danger. And as I drove, one thought kept repeating in my head, cold and clear. If my father had made himself next of kin, it wasn't because Thazin had nobody. It was because he wanted to make sure she stayed that way. By the time I pulled into the hospital parking lot, my fear had changed shape. It wasn't the shaky fear of a kid waiting for a parent to show up. It was the focused fear you feel when you realize the monster might be wearing a clean shirt and a gentle smile. Inside, I skipped patient relations and asked for the charge nurse. I kept my voice steady, my face calm, like I belonged in rooms where decisions get made. I need to report a safety concern, I said. Not a complaint, a concern. The charge nurse, older, sharp-eyed, measured me in a single glance. About which patient? I can't give you a name, I said carefully, but I can tell you this. The next of kin listed is my father, and he has a history of controlling the person he's listed for. Her eyebrows rose. That's serious. I know, I said. I'm not asking for medical details. I'm asking you to involve social work and make sure the patient is spoken to privately before anyone calls him. For a moment, all I heard was the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant beep that makes every hallway feel like borrowed time. Then she nodded once. Wait here. I waited, standing so still my legs ached. Nurses moved past with trays and linen carts. Someone laughed softly behind a curtain. 10 minutes later, the charge nurse returned with a woman in a plain blazer and a badge that read social work. Her expression was neutral in that practiced way, like she'd learned to hold other people's storms without getting drenched. I'm Ms. Elwyn, she said. You reported a concern about a patient's next of kin. Yes, I said. My father is listed, and I believe the patient may not be safe with him. Ms. Elwyn didn't flinch. Are you related to the patient? I don't know, I admitted. I didn't even know she existed until yesterday. You said she, Ms. Elwyn noted. I have reason to believe the patient is a young woman, I said, and my stomach twisted at how much danger those words carried. I can't confirm anything, Ms. Elwyn replied, but we take coercion seriously. If the patient can speak, we interview them privately. If not, we proceed carefully. Carefully. The word sounded like a promise and a loophole at the same time. I'm afraid he'll get to her first, I said. We limit access during evaluation, she said, and we document restrictions if the patient requests them. Requests? I thought of Daw Maya's voice. She had no one. People like her don't grow up believing they're allowed to request anything. I have something, I said, reaching into my bag. My fingers shook as I pulled out a printed copy of the old email attachment. Legal clinic letterhead, formal language, my mother's forwarded plea still echoing in the subject line. This mentions guardianship, consent, and a name tied to him. Ms. Elwyn read the first lines. Her face didn't change dramatically, but the air around her did. The neutral mask tightened into focus. This was no longer gossip, it was a pattern. I can't add third-party documents to a medical record, she said, but I can note your concerns. Legal control, missing documents, possible exploitation. That's all I'm asking, I said. I don't want to be the person who saw something and walked away. Ms. Elwyn held my gaze. If what you're suggesting is true, the most important thing is the patient's voice. Not yours, not your father's, hers. Yes, I said, that's what I want. Wait here, she said, and disappeared down the corridor. I sat in a plastic chair, hands clasped tight enough to hurt. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Twice. I didn't need to look to know who it was. My father always sensed movement the way a spider senses vibration. When I checked, there were 2 messages. Where are you? Don't do this. He didn't say please this time. He didn't pretend it was for my sake. He went straight to command. I didn't answer. I watched the hallway instead. Because every door that opened could be the one that changed everything. After what felt like an hour but was probably 20 minutes, Ms. Elwyn returned. Her face had cracked into something more human, controlled urgency, quiet seriousness. She spoke with us, Ms. Elwyn said softly. My throat tightened. Is she okay? She's medically stable, Ms. Elwyn replied. But she's frightened, and she asked that we not contact the person listed as next of kin. Relief hit me so hard my eyes burned. She asked that. Yes, Ms. Elwyn said, and that matters. I swallowed. Did she say why? Ms. Elwyn chose her words like she was stepping around glass. She said he is not her family, she said. And then she corrected herself. She said, he says he is. My stomach dropped. So he's lying. Ms. Elwyn didn't give me the satisfaction of the word. She told us he arranged her papers, she continued. That he kept her documents, that she was told she had no one else. My hands trembled. Her name is Thazin, I whispered, and Ms. Elwyn's eyes flicked up. You know her name, she said. I heard it, I admitted, from someone who knows him. Ms. Elwyn's jaw tightened. She also told us something else, she said lower. She said she once believed he was helping her because of a promise he made to her mother. A promise? The phrase turned my blood cold. What kind of promise? She said her mother worked for him, Ms. Elwyn answered. Years ago, and that her mother died believing he would take responsibility. Responsibility. The word my father wore like a badge at family gatherings, like it was stitched into his suit. That doesn't make him her father, I said, though my voice sounded like I was trying to convince myself. Ms. Elwyn's gaze was steady. She believes he is, she said. Or she believed it long enough for him to use it. She said he never claimed her publicly, but he used the possibility to keep her quiet. He told her that if she caused trouble, people would say she was lying for money. He told her she'd lose everything. Greed versus integrity wasn't abstract anymore. It was a lever. It was the way a powerful man turns a vulnerable person's survival into a contract written only in fear. And the next of kin listing, I asked. She said he insisted, Ms. Elwyn replied. He told her it was for her safety. He said hospitals treat you better if someone respectable is listed. He said he would protect her. Protect, the same word he'd used with me. A word that sounded like love until you saw the cage behind it. I felt pieces locked together with sick clarity. He wasn't next of kin because he cared. He was next of kin because it made him the first call, the first voice, the first story. It made him the one who could steer what happened before anyone asked the wrong questions. Is she in danger? I asked, and my voice broke on the last syllable. She's vulnerable, Ms. Elwyn said. Limited support, limited resources, a long pattern of coercion. The danger isn't only physical, it's legal, social, psychological. My chest tightened until breathing hurt. My father's power wasn't in fists. It was in forms, in signatures, in the way communities looked away when a man said he was helping. He'll come, I said. He'll talk his way in. We will follow protocol, Ms. Elwyn replied, but the way she said it told me protocol wasn't always enough. I stared at her. Tell me one thing, I said, barely above a whisper. Is she my sister? Ms. Elwyn went still. I can't answer that, she said. But she didn't have to. The truth was already hanging in the air. Blood was being used as a threat, responsibility as a trap. Whether my father was her biological father or simply playing that role, he'd built a story that kept her tethered to him, and he'd written his name into the system to make that tether official. My phone buzzed again, a call from him. The screen lit up with his name like it belonged to a good man. I didn't answer. Ms. Elwyn watched the screen. If you're afraid of him, she said quietly, consider your own safety too. I nodded, but my attention had shifted. For years, my father's absence had been my private wound, something I carried and tried to outgrow. Now I understood his presence, selective, strategic, performative, could be a weapon pointed at someone else entirely. The person most endangered by this secret wasn't me. It was Thazin, lying in a hospital bed, finally asking for help, while my father stood outside the door with his name on her chart like a claim. My father didn't stop calling. He called like a man trying to outrun a fire, quick, relentless, certain he could smother it if he got there first. I let it ring until the phone went quiet again, then vibrated with another message. Answer me now. No greeting, no concern, just the command of someone who believed my silence was disobedience, not self-protection. I was still on the second floor when I finally moved. Not toward him, toward the exit, toward air, toward the kind of space where I could think without the hospital's beeping heart reminding me that time was already making decisions for us. Outside, the sun was too bright for what I knew. I stood beside my car and stared at the screen until my eyes blurred. Then I hit call back before fear could talk me out of it. He answered immediately, like he'd been holding the phone. Where are you? He demanded. I'm at the hospital, I said, and my voice surprised me with its steadiness. The same hospital where your name is listed as next of kin. A pause, one controlled inhale. "Why are you doing this?" he said, softer now, as if lowering his tone could lower my resolve. "Because she asked them not to contact you," I said. I watched the words hit him through the line. "And because I know you arranged her papers." For the first time, his calm cracked. "Who told you that?" "You're asking the wrong question," I said. "The right question is why you did it." He exhaled slowly, gathering himself. "You don't understand," he said, and I could hear him reaching for the old story, the reasonable father, the misunderstood helper. "This is complicated." "It's not," I replied. "It's very simple. You put your name on her chart. You positioned yourself as the person they call, and she's scared of you." "She's confused," he snapped. "She's sick. She doesn't know what she's saying." There it was, the first attempt to erase her voice. Contrast in real time, my father's reputation versus her reality. "I spoke to social work," I said. "They heard her privately without you." A sharp silence. Somewhere in the background, I heard the faint clink of keys, a car door, the sound of movement. He was heading there. "Listen to me," he said, and the tone shifted again, no longer smooth, now urgent. "You need to leave. Now you're making things worse." "No," I said. "You made it worse." "You always do this," he hissed. "You twist things. You make me the villain because you've been angry your whole life." The accusation landed where it was meant to, on the soft bruise of my childhood. He wanted me to doubt myself, to feel like my concern was just a tantrum dressed up as morality. But my anger wasn't the point anymore. Thazin was. "This isn't about my feelings," I said, and my voice sharpened. "This is about her safety." "She is safe," he insisted. "With me." "With you," I repeated, and something cold rose in my chest. "Dad, you weren't even safe with me." He went quiet. For a moment I thought I'd finally cut through him. Then he spoke, and the softness returned like a mask snapping back into place. "You're emotional," he said. "You've always been emotional, that's why I kept distance. I didn't want to hurt you." The lie was so polished it almost sounded like truth. He wasn't apologizing. He was rewriting. He was turning neglect into sacrifice. He was trying to make me feel guilty for seeing clearly. I heard my own breath loud in my ears. "Are you her father?" I asked. The line went still. "Answer," I said. He didn't. He didn't deny it either. Instead, he said, "You don't know what you're accusing me of." "I'm not accusing," I replied. "I'm asking, are you her father or not?" Another pause, longer, and then quietly, "It doesn't matter." It doesn't matter. The phrase stunned me. Blood versus responsibility, the exact contrast I'd been circling for days. To him, biology was a tool, not a bond. It mattered when it gave him leverage. It didn't matter when it demanded accountability. "It matters to her," I said, "and it matters to me." "It's not your business," he repeated, his favorite weapon. "You want to ruin my life because you've never forgiven me for not being the father you wanted." "No," I said, and the truth in my voice surprised even me. "I don't want to ruin your life. I want you to stop ruining hers." His breath turned sharp. "You think you're some hero," he said. "You think you can walk into adult problems and fix them. You can't." "Maybe not," I said, "but I can stop you from controlling the story." I ended the call before he could. My hands shook, adrenaline rushing through me like I'd just stepped off a ledge. The world around me kept moving, cars, voices, sunlight, but my body felt like it was bracing for impact. Impact came in the form of my aunt. She called 2 minutes later. Her name lit up on my screen, and dread pooled in my stomach. My father was already spreading his version. He always moved faster through family than truth could. I answered, "Auntie." Her voice was tight, breathy. "What are you doing?" she demanded, without greeting. "Your father says you're causing trouble at the hospital." So it had begun. Family lines drawn, loyalty tested. "I'm not causing trouble," I said. "I'm trying to protect someone." "Protect who?" she snapped. "From your own father." "Yes," I said, and the word felt like breaking glass in my mouth. A beat of stunned silence, then her voice turned sharp with fear. You don't say things like that, she hissed. He's your father. He's her next of kin, I said. That's the problem. You don't know the whole story, she insisted. Your father has done so much for people. You're judging him. I stared at the dashboard, the familiar ache of being misunderstood by the same people who dismissed my childhood disappointments as family matters. Community loyalty was a thick blanket, warm until it suffocated you. I do know the story, I said quietly, at least enough to know she asked the hospital not to call him. My aunt inhaled sharply. Who told you that? It doesn't matter, I said, mirroring my father's words with a bitterness that tasted like iron. What matters is what he's going to do now. He's going to help her, my aunt said. He's going to take her home when she's discharged. She has nowhere else. The sentence made my blood run cold. Take her home. The phrase again, rescue dressed as ownership. No, I said. What do you mean no? My aunt barked. I mean that would be catastrophic, I said, and I didn't soften it. If she goes with him, she'll disappear back into whatever control he's built. She'll lose her voice again. My aunt's tone shifted and I recognized it, bargaining, the family's favorite form of peace. Listen, she said, forcing calm. You can talk to him at home, not in public like this. Don't shame him. There it is, I whispered. Reputation, that's what you care about. It's not about reputation, she snapped, but her voice cracked. It's about family. Family, the word that had excused so much silence. If family means enabling, I said, then I don't want that kind. You're being dramatic, she said, but now there was pleading. Please just stop, let him handle it. The plea wasn't for Thazin. It was for the comfort of believing my father was a good man. I closed my eyes. Fear and courage wrestled in my chest. A part of me wanted to fold, to return to the role I'd always played. Quiet child, grateful daughter, the one who doesn't ask hard questions. That part of me knew the cost of conflict inside a family. But another part of me, newer, fiercer, heard Damaya's words. People like her are disposable, and I couldn't be part of that disposal, not with my eyes open. I can't, I said. I won't. My aunt's voice turned icy. Then you're choosing strangers over blood. The old guilt tried to rise. I pushed it down. No, I said. I'm choosing the truth over your comfort. When I hung up, my hands were steady. Not because it was easy, but because the moral line had finally drawn itself. My father had allies, family, reputation, the habit of people looking away. And he was already moving toward the hospital, toward Thazin, toward the moment where paperwork could decide her future. I stared at the hospital doors and imagined him walking in, calm and smiling, telling everyone he was here to help, while the real danger stood right behind his kindness. If he got to her before the discharge plan was locked, he could take her. And if he took her, I wasn't sure I'd ever find her again. When you grow up learning that family peace is fragile, you become fluent in self-erasure. You swallow questions. You soften your voice. You apologize for needs you didn't create. You learn that the easiest way to survive is to keep the story tidy, especially when the truth would make everyone uncomfortable. Sitting in my car outside the hospital, phone heavy in my hand, I realized my father's greatest gift to our family wasn't money or wisdom or love. It was the habit of silence. Silence kept him respectable. Silence kept my aunt loyal. Silence kept my mother tired instead of furious. Silence kept me from asking why I was always the one left waiting. And now silence was about to send a young woman back into his care, like a package returned to the wrong address. My phone buzzed again. Another call from him. I watched his name fill the screen and felt a strange clarity. Answering him would not give me truth. It would give him a stage. I declined the call and opened my notes instead. I wrote down what I knew, clean and factual, because feelings could be dismissed but details left marks. Patient, Thazin, young woman. Collapse near bus stop. Intake around 1:12 a.m. next of kin listed. My father. Patient fearful, requested no contact. History, documents controlled, dependents, possible coercion. Family pushing discharge into his home. I stared at the list and felt the fork in the road like a physical thing. One direction led back to the familiar. Keep the peace, protect the family name, let the adults handle it the way they always had. The other direction led into conflict and risk, and the possibility that I would be called dramatic, ungrateful, disloyal. But the second direction also led to one thing I hadn't felt in years: integrity. I got out of the car and walked back inside. At the information desk, I asked for social work again and waited without flinching. When Ms. Elwyn appeared, I could tell she'd had a morning too, tension at the corners of her mouth, a kind of alertness in her eyes. "He's here," I said before she could speak. "My father, he's coming." Ms. Elwyn's jaw tightened. "We expected that." "Is Thazin protected?" I asked. "We are limiting access," Ms. Elwyn said. "But he's listed as next of kin. That gives him leverage unless the patient revokes it formally." "Then we formalize it," I said. Her eyebrows lifted slightly. "We can document her wishes, but she needs support to sustain them." "I'll find it," I said. The words came out like a vow. Ms. Elwyn studied me for a beat. "Are you prepared for what this will do to your family relationships?" she asked quietly. The question hit like a hand on a bruise. Prepared? No, but I was done letting fear decide what I deserved to do. "I'm prepared for what happens if I do nothing," I said. She nodded once. "Okay, here's what we can do today." We moved into a small office that smelled faintly of paper and sanitizer. She outlined options in the careful language of someone who lived between rules and reality. A patient advocate to ensure Thazin understood her rights. A safety plan for discharge. A note in the chart that restricts information. A request for a private meeting with the attending physician. Social services involvement if there was suspicion of exploitation. Legal aid referrals if guardianship or document control was involved. Each option felt like a door in a hallway I hadn't known existed. None of them were perfect, but together they formed something I recognized: a way out. "First," Ms. Elwyn said, "we need Thazin's consent to involve any outside support. She must choose it." "She's been trained not to choose," I murmured before I could stop myself. Ms. Elwyn's expression softened, but she didn't deny it. "Which is why we bring in an advocate," she said. "Someone who can explain rights without pressure." "Do it," I said, "please." While Ms. Elwyn made calls, I asked for a pen and wrote down the name of a local legal aid clinic from the old letter, then searched their current number on my phone. My hands shook as I dialed, not because I doubted the call, but because I knew my father would call this betrayal. A receptionist answered, bright and brisk. I introduced myself and asked, carefully, whether they handled cases involving coercion, document retention, and informal guardianship arrangements. "Yes," she said. "Is this an emergency situation?" I glanced at the hallway where my father could appear any moment, smiling, charming, telling everyone he was here to help. "It might become one," I said. She gave me instructions: what information they could accept without violating privacy, how a patient could request counsel, how to initiate a consult through hospital social work. She spoke like someone who'd heard stories like this before, and that made my stomach sink and my resolve harden at the same time. Next, I called a number Ms. Elwyn provided for a patient advocacy service. They asked for the hospital unit, the general nature of the concern, and whether the patient had requested confidentiality. I answered in clean sentences, leaving out my father's name until they asked, directly, if there was a potential abuser involved. "Yes," I said. "He's listed as next of kin." A pause. "Understood," the advocate said. "We'll come today." When I hung up, Ms. Elwyn looked at me with something like respect, quiet, professional, but real. "You're moving quickly," she said. "He moves quicker," I replied. As if summoned by the sentence, my phone buzzed again. A text this time. "You're humiliating me. Everyone is watching. Stop now and we can talk like adults." Humiliating, not hurting someone, not endangering someone, humiliating. I stared at the message until the words blurred. Then I turned the phone face down on the table like I was cutting the thread he used to tug me. My chest ached with a familiar grief, the grief of wanting a father and having a strategist instead. "I need to speak to the attending doctor," I said to Ms. Elwyn. "We can request a meeting," she replied, but again, without the patient's consent. "Then get her consent," I said. "Not through me, through the advocate, through you, but make sure she knows he cannot take her home unless she says yes." Ms. Elwyn nodded. "We'll explain discharge options." Discharge. The word sounded harmless until you realized it was a handoff, one environment to another, one set of rules to a different set of power dynamics. In the hospital, staff had protocols. Outside, Thazin would have only her own voice against my father's. I walked the corridor slowly, keeping my posture calm. Inside, my body hummed with adrenaline. Every person who passed me could be him. Every door that opened could release his charm into the hallway like perfume. Near the elevator, I saw him. He stood with his shoulders squared and his hair neatly combed, as if he'd come from an office rather than an accusation. He wore the same careful expression he used at weddings and funerals, concerned, respectable, inconvenienced in a noble way. If anyone glanced at him, they would see a devoted caregiver waiting anxiously for news. His eyes found me instantly, and the warmth vanished. In its place, a tight, controlled anger. He walked toward me with the smooth certainty of a man used to rooms opening for him. "What are you doing?" he asked, low. I met his gaze and didn't flinch. "Making sure she has a choice," I said. His jaw tightened. "You're making a scene." "You made the scene," I replied. "You just want to be the only one allowed to narrate it." He leaned closer, voice dropping into a private threat. "If you keep pushing, you'll regret it," he said. "You'll destroy your relationship with this family." There it was, the leash. Love offered as a privilege, belonging dangled like a reward. For years, that threat would have worked. I would have folded to keep a place at the table, even if the table was cold. But I looked at him and felt something shift, something small but permanent. I didn't need his approval to be decent. I didn't need his permission to protect someone he'd positioned as voiceless. "I'm not protecting my name anymore," I said quietly. "I'm protecting a life." His eyes flashed, and for a second his mask slipped. I saw the version of him MYA had described, the man who became dangerous when control wobbled. Then his expression smoothed again, charming returning like a light turned on. A nurse passed behind me, and my father's voice lifted, sweet and concerned. "I just want to see how she's doing," he said loudly enough to be heard. "I'm her next of kin." My stomach twisted. Even now, he was performing for witnesses. I turned away before the performance could pull me in. I walked back toward Ms. Elwyn's office, heart pounding, because the turning point wasn't in the hallway. It was inside me. I had crossed the line from daughter to protector, from silence to accountability. And whatever happened next, whatever names they called me, whatever family doors closed, I knew one thing with terrifying certainty. If I stopped now, he would win. And Thazin would pay the price. It happened quietly, the way the biggest changes sometimes do. Not with a courtroom slam or a public confession, but with a pen moving across paper in a small office that smelled like sanitizer and stale coffee. The patient advocate arrived first. She spoke to Thazin alone, door closed, voice low, explaining rights in plain language. Who could be contacted, who could be kept out, what discharge meant, what next of kin actually allowed. When Ms. Elwyn came back to me, she didn't share details. She didn't have to. Her eyes carried the kind of relief you feel when someone chooses their own voice for the first time. "She revoked him," Ms. Elwyn said simply. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Revoked. A formal word for an intimate victory. A word that meant my father's name no longer had automatic power over Thazin's body, her decisions, her story. He tried anyway. When he learned he'd been removed as contact, he didn't rage at staff. He smiled. He asked questions with concern in his voice, using phrases like "I'm just worried," and "I only want what's best." He said he could take responsibility, like responsibility was a generous gift instead of a debt. But the doors didn't open the way they used to. The attending physician met with social work, the advocate, and Thazin, again privately. Legal aid offered a consultation. A safety plan was written. A temporary placement was arranged through community services, not through him. Thazin chose a shelter program with support for women leaving coercive situations, and for the first time since I'd learned her name, I pictured her sleeping somewhere with a lock she controlled. My father found me near the elevators that afternoon. His face looked calm, but his eyes were bright with fury he couldn't show. "You think you won," he said softly. "I don't want to win," I replied. "I want her safe." He tilted his head. "You've always wanted to punish me," he said. "No," I said. "This is what you made necessary." His mouth tightened. "You're turning the family against me." "You did that the day you decided control was the same thing as care," I answered. He leaned closer, voice dropping. "If you keep this up," he whispered, "you'll have no one." I believed him. My family's loyalty had always had conditions. It was easier to stand with a man who looked respectable than the truth that looked messy. And still, something inside me steadied instead of collapsing. "Then I'll have myself," I said. I walked away before he could respond, because I wasn't going to negotiate my integrity in a hallway. In the days that followed, the fallout arrived in small, sharp pieces. My aunt stopped answering. A cousin sent a message that read, "Why are you doing this to him?" My mother's voice went quiet, like she was trying to hold the family together with thread and prayer. I didn't get a neat confession. I didn't get my father admitting anything he could be judged for. He stayed in the world as he'd always been, a man who could smile at strangers and call it goodness. But his control cracked. That was the part that mattered. That evening, security asked him to leave after he argued at the desk, still smiling as he threatened complaints. Watching him walk out, I felt no satisfaction, only a sober gratitude that the building's rules finally held against his charm. The moment wasn't revenge. It was a boundary, and boundaries can save lives when love cannot do. Thazin was discharged into support, not into his home. Her documents were reported missing, and steps were taken to replace them. She filed a request to remove his name from any future records. She began meeting with a counselor who spoke gently about trauma and boundaries, and for the first time, she had a space where no was treated as complete. I met her once briefly in a quiet room where sunlight touched the edge of the table. She looked smaller than I expected, but her eyes were sharp. She didn't thank me with dramatic words. She just said, "You saw me." I nodded, throat tight. "I'm sorry it took so long." She shook her head. "Most people look away," she said. "You didn't." That sentence became my closure. Not closure in the sense of ending, but closure in the sense of choosing. I couldn't rewrite my childhood. I couldn't force my father to become the man his title promised. What I could do was refuse to repeat the pattern, refuse to call control love, refuse to protect appearances at the cost of someone else's safety. For years, I'd carried the quiet shame of not having the kind of father people admired. Now I understood it differently. The shame was never mine to carry. Integrity wasn't something my father could grant or withhold. As I left the hospital for the last time, the automatic doors opened and the air outside felt new. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt clean, like I'd finally stepped out of a story written by someone else and started drafting my own. Family, I realized, isn't who gets to own you on a form. Family is who protects you when you're most vulnerable, even if it costs them comfort. And if my father could sign himself into someone else's life as next of kin, then I could sign myself into mine. Not with ink on a chart, but with a decision that held. I was done waiting to be claimed. I was finally the next of kin to my own life.